Hi guys, Josh here, aka Beards and Books, and today I'm doing my June wrap-up video. Without further ado, let's begin. So June was a really good reading month for me. As you can see, I finished 5 books altogether. I loved each of the books for their own reasons. The first of those books being Mortal Engines 1 and 2. So the Mortal Engines and the Mortal Engines Predator's Gold. So for those of you that don't know, the Mortal Engines Quartet is a YA steampunk sci-fi style fantasy. It's set in the future where a fictional war called the 60-Minute War has destroyed the planet essentially. It caused earthquakes and volcanoes, meaning that the cities and the countries that were left had to find a way to survive. London, being the productive first city, invented what was called traction. So a famous inventor called Nicholas Quirk made giant engines and essentially turbine wheels to pull the city along, hunting down other cities for fuel, for resources, and so they could carry on growing. Now, this ended up being something called municipal Darwinism, where other countries took up the same lead essentially, and eventually, by the time we get to the Mortal Engines, pretty much every city and country is known as a traction city. So I really enjoyed Mortal Engines. The two main characters of Tom and Hester were both really interesting, really fleshed out and very different characters. They couldn't be any more different to each other, but it plays really well in terms of the plot of the story. They both have interesting arcs as characters go. They're not one pan the whole way through. They do change and evolve as the story goes on. There's an interesting twist with the bad guy that I didn't necessarily see coming towards the end. I won't spoil any of it if you do decide to pick up the book. There's also a film for Mortal Engines coming up, which Peter Jackson, who did the Lord of the Rings films, is making. So fingers crossed he can do them just as well as he did the Lord of the Rings stories. So the main plot for Mortal Engines, we follow Tom and Hester, the two main characters, on a plot for revenge. Now, there's a lot of twists and turns along the way. There's interesting side stories with terrorists called the Anti-Traction League trying to stop all traction cities from moving, feeling that the world should become static again as it is now, and cities and countries should stay where they are. Overall, it's a very interesting read. I went back to back with Mortal Engines and Predator's Gold, which I rarely do for sequels, and I'd give them both 7.5 out of 10. They were very good reads, very quick, interesting YA reads. If you're interested in something steampunk, sci-fi styled, but revolving around good characters, I would definitely recommend it. I'm not going to talk too much about Predator's Gold, which is the sequel, because to do that I have to give away a lot of spoilers from the Mortal Engines. But let me know, guys, down in the comments what you thought of Mortal Engines if you've had a chance to read it and you're excited for the Peter Jackson film. So one of my goals for this reading year is to read more Stephen King. Now, I've never read a lot of Stephen King. I've been interested in a lot of the stories, but for one reason or another, I've only read a handful of his stories. So what I'm doing at the moment, I'm trying to prepare myself to read It, essentially, which will be the biggest book that I've ever read at just over 1,000 pages. But in order to do that, what I'm doing is I'm going through the smaller Stephen King novels, such as Cujo, at around 300, 400 pages to get myself a feeling for his writing style, as he can be slightly slow in places, Stephen King, I find, but my review for Cujo is very positive. So most people will know the story of Cujo. Cujo is a 200-pound St. Bernard who becomes infected by rabies. Obviously, as the rabies spreads further and further into his brain, he becomes more angry, more aggressive. Luckily for the citizens in the town where Cujo lives, it's an isolated incident because where he lives is very remote and out the way, which is good for the town, but it's not good for the main story and the main people in Cujo. So we follow the story from multiple perspectives, but the main perspective being a mother and a son who are trapped in a car where Cujo lives. So they've gone to this garage to get some repair work done without knowing the owner has left, meaning Cujo is there on his own, and as the rabies spreads further and further, he becomes more aggressive, taking out that anger on the mum and son who have been stranded at the garage. Obviously, with their car being broke and with the dog outside, it's not very easy for them to get away. I won't go into the story in too much detail just in case it's when you plan on reading. I won't give any spoilers away. One interesting fact I found when reading up about the book was this was actually an idea that came to Stephen King through a life experience of his own. So whilst riding a motorbike where Stephen King lives in Maine in the USA, he had some problems with his bike, so he took it to a local garage, which was similar to Cujo in quite a remote location. When Stephen King arrived there, he was approached by 200-pound St. Bernard, who went to nip at his hand, but luckily the garage owner gave the dog a little tap on his back legs, moving him away. But that then sprung the idea for Cujo. Cujo's a British Fantasy Award-winning novel, so obviously it's held in very high regards. I personally really enjoyed it, and as one of my first Stephen King outings, I'd give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. There's nothing necessarily wrong with the story, and the way that it was done, it couldn't really be avoided, but I found that the way that the main characters were in one location was slow in parts, but overall I completely understand that with the nature of the story, it had to happen. Book number 3, Game of Thrones, book number 4, A Feast for the Crows. Now, if you've watched any of my videos, especially my BookTube newbie tag, you'll have heard me say that Game of Thrones is one of my favourite ever series. Whether that be fantasy, books in general, Game of Thrones to me is a solid 10 out of 10 for every outing. Now, I've been taking my time with Game of Thrones because for those of you that don't know, there are 6 novels out at the moment, with this being number 4, and the 7th and final novel is due out anytime next year, essentially. But George R.R. Martin has quite a track record of delaying the series as they go. So with that in mind, I haven't been hurrying to Game of Thrones because I'm trying to avoid having too long to wait because I won't be able to handle it. A Feast for the Crows follows a certain set of characters. Now, interestingly, with this book, it's the slightly smaller characters that we maybe haven't seen as much of in other books. The main reason for that is the book was becoming so big with all of the characters in that George R. R. Martin made the decision with his publishers to split it into 2. So A Feast for the Crows follows the side characters building up the story, and the next novel, which is A Dance with Dragons Part 1, follows the main characters of the story such as Jon Snow, Daenerys and Tyrion. I'm not going to go into a full review for this. Game of Thrones is impossible to ignore, so everyone out there will, I would hope, understand and know the story. Fantasy fans, if you haven't picked up Game of Thrones, you 100% need to. Each book is a solid 10 out of 10. I understand they're quite intimidating at first. It took me a while to pull up the courage to read them, but trust me, as soon as you get that first book in your hand and you're a couple of chapters in, you will not want to put it down. Solid 10 out of 10, the same as every Game of Thrones novel for me. Finally, the 5th book that I finished in the month of June is Forever and a Day by Anthony Horowitz, the latest 007 James Bond novel. So you might have seen I've put up a full review of this, which I will link down in the description if you are interested in reading the book. So again, I won't go into it in too much detail as I have already, but in this story we follow the origin story of James Bond. The original 007 is killed, bringing up a vacancy which James Bond is essentially primed and ready to go for, so he's put in for the 007 role. We follow James on his first mission, meeting his first Bond girl, and how he evolves into the character that we know. He doesn't start off as the strong and assured, confident character. He starts off as quite a nervous character who, although he knows his stuff and has been in the espionage world for quite some time, still needs reassurance on his first mission, and without some quite lucky circumstances probably wouldn't make it to the end of the book, but what kind of a story would it be if he did? I really enjoyed the writing style by Anthony Horowitz, and I am going to definitely pick up Trigger Mortis, which is the other James Bond novel Anthony Horowitz has wrote. This is a great origin story for James Bond. It's not a 10 out of 10 story. If you watch my full review, you'll understand my points on why. But overall, I gave it a solid 7 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. Any spy fans out there should definitely pick it up. I would highly recommend. Just don't expect it to be the best novel you've ever read. So guys, I really hope you've enjoyed the video. This is my first ever monthly wrap-up video for BookTube. I'm still new to this, so I'm just finding my feet. If there's any comments, recommendations you give me, please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe as it helps a new BookTuber out a heck of a lot. I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.